I always thought family was supposed to mean something. I'm 65 years old now, and for most of my life, I believed my younger brother and I were building a future together. Something steady, something honest, something we could hand down to our kids one day. When he came to me years ago, broke and desperate, asking for help to start a small construction business, I didn't hesitate. I put in everything I had, my savings, my tools, my experience, my sweat. Back then, I didn't care whose name was on the paperwork. I trusted him. I trusted us. But success has a strange way of changing people. Before I even realized what was happening, my name started disappearing from conversations, then from clients, then from the business altogether. And the moment the money rolled in, my own brother acted like I was never part of it at all. This is the story of how I lost the business we built, and how I finally took my life back. I guess the story really starts long before the business, before the money, before the papers and the arguments and the silence that came later. It starts in those early years when my brother, Mark, and I were just two boys trying to survive inside a house that didn't have enough love for either of us. He was always the softer one, the dreamer. I was the one who learned to keep my head down, work hard, and figure things out with my hands. Maybe that's why I felt responsible for him, even long after we became grown men. Some habits stay with you your whole life, I suppose. I was 65 when everything finally fell apart, but back then, back when he first came to me, I was still in my mid-50s, still steady on my feet, still strong enough to carry a ladder with one hand and a bucket of tools with the other. I'd been working construction for most of my life. Long days, calloused hands, quiet evenings. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest. And I was proud of the life I'd built. Mark wasn't doing as well. He was 49 at the time, going through his second divorce, drinking too much and bouncing from job to job. When he finally called me one night, his voice shaking, I knew something was wrong the moment I answered. He said he was out of work again, behind on bills, and scared he might lose the small apartment he'd just moved into. I remember sitting there with the phone pressed to my ear, listening to this grown man, my own brother, sound like a kid again. And something inside me just softened. You don't shake off family that easily. Not when you've spent your whole life being the only one he ever turned to. He said, I want to do better, man. I want to start fresh. I don't know how. That's when he told me his idea, starting a small construction and repair business together. He wanted to learn the trade, he said. He wanted someone to believe in him. He wanted me to believe in him. I can still hear the way he said it. Quiet, hopeful, like he finally had something worth trying for. And just like that, I said yes. Maybe I should have asked more questions. Maybe I should have thought it through, talked to a lawyer, or at least put something on paper. But that's not how my heart works. Not when it comes to him. I've always been the kind of man who trusts the people he loves, even when it costs him. And at the time, it didn't feel like a sacrifice. It felt like purpose. I dipped into my savings, 25 years of careful putting away. I bought tools, equipment, a used work truck with chipped paint. I paid for our business license, the insurance, the first round of flyers. I didn't complain about the cost. I didn't even think twice about it. I was excited, if I'm being honest. At my age, you don't expect to start over. But it felt good. It felt like life was offering me one last big chapter. And Mark, he seemed grateful. Truly grateful. At least in those early days. The first few mornings, he'd show up at my place before sunrise with coffee he bought from that little gas station down the road. He'd sit on the back step tying his boots, talking about how he wanted to build something that mattered. He asked me to teach him everything. How to measure twice and cut once, how to run wiring properly, how to patch drywall so cleanly you couldn't see where the hole had been. He listened, he tried, he asked questions. For the first time in years, I saw the spark in him. We'd laugh a lot back then. Not big loud laughs, but those small ones you share when things feel simple and good. I remember watching him hold a drill the wrong way the first week, his wrist almost twisting, and he burst out laughing so hard he had to put the thing down. I laughed too, and I told him he was lucky I was patient. He said, I know. That's why I need you. And for a moment, that made me feel seen. Appreciated. We worked long days on small jobs, fixing fences, repairing roofs, replacing tiles in old kitchens. Nothing big, nothing fancy. But each job meant something. Each satisfied customer felt like another brick in a foundation we were building together. When the first handwritten thank you note arrived from a woman we helped with a broken step, Mark held it like a trophy. He kept showing it to me all day. And I felt proud. Not just of him, but of us. We weren't making much money in the beginning. Some weeks were slow. Some jobs paid late. But whenever we sat on the tailgate of the truck after a long day, wiping sweat from our faces and drinking cheap bottled water, it felt like progress. It felt like we were finally growing into who we were always meant to be. People in town started recognizing our truck. One guy at the hardware store even called me one of the brothers. I didn't correct him. It made me smile. After so many years of struggle, loneliness, and old wounds, it felt good to be building something side by side. It felt good to matter to someone. I'll tell you the truth. In those early months, I saw a version of my brother I thought I'd lost a long time ago. He worked hard. He showed up on time. He thanked me, sometimes even hugged me. He even told our mother, back when she was still alive, that he was proud to be working with me. That memory sits heavy on my heart because it reminds me that somewhere inside him, there was still that boy who looked up to me. But life has a way of shifting in quiet ways. Changes rarely come with warning signs. They creep in slowly, through little moments you don't think twice about until they stack up. The first turnover happened when a customer praised Mark for a job I had done. He didn't correct them. He just nodded. I brushed it off. I wanted him to feel good. He needed the confidence. Then he started taking calls without telling me. Scheduling jobs before I'd even seen the calendar. Making promises he didn't have the experience to keep. I thought he was just excited. Trying to show he could handle things. We were brothers. We were partners. I told myself it was fine. One evening, after a long day fixing a leaky roof in the middle of summer heat, we sat in the truck with the windows rolled down. Sweat sticking to our shirts. My hands aching. And he turned to me with this look, half worried, half determined, and said, "Man, I think we can really make something big out of this." I nodded and told him I believed that. I told him I believed in him. Looking back, I wonder if he heard that wrong. Maybe he thought I meant the business belonged to him more than me. Maybe he thought my belief gave him permission to take the reins. Or maybe he was never planning on sharing it in the first place. But at that moment, everything felt hopeful. We started getting bigger calls. Small commercial repairs. A basement remodel. Word of mouth helped a lot. People trusted us. People liked us. And every time someone handed us a check, Mark's smile grew wider, more confident. I remember the day we finished our first big remodeling project, a full kitchen revamp. The couple came in, saw the new cabinets, the shining countertops, the clean tile work. The woman put her hand over her heart and said, "You boys did a beautiful job. You boys." As if we were a team. As if we both mattered. Mark wrapped an arm around my shoulder and said, "Couldn't have done any of it without him." And he meant it. I could feel the honesty in his voice. That was a good day. One of the last good ones, if I'm being honest. See, the thing about trust is that it doesn't break loudly. It cracks slowly, quietly, in places you're not looking. By the time you finally hear it, the damage is already deeper than you can fix. But I didn't know any of that back then. All I saw was the business growing, my brother growing, and this future we were building, something steady, something ours. And I was proud. God, I was proud. Even now, after everything that happened, part of me still remembers those early months with a kind of bittersweet warmth. Because in those moments, I truly believed we were building a life side by side. I believed we were building something honest. Something that would carry us both into the years ahead. But I guess life was getting ready to show me something different. Something I wasn't prepared for. Something I didn't want to see. And it started with little things I didn't pay enough attention to. Small signs that the business I thought we shared was slowly slipping out of my hands and into his, inch by inch. I didn't notice the change at first. That's the part that still bothers me sometimes when I look back. You'd think after living more than 6 decades on this earth, after seeing people come and go, I would have recognized the signs. But the truth is, when you love someone, you don't expect betrayal. Not from them. Not from your own blood. The business kept growing, just like we'd hoped it would. Word spread faster than we could have predicted. One job led to another, and then another, until our calendar had fewer empty days than full ones. For a while, it felt like we were finally catching our stride, like all those early mornings and scraped knuckles were paying off. But success has a way of changing the air around people. It makes some folks stand taller, work harder, and it makes others look in the mirror and see someone more important than they used to be. It started small, almost invisible. One morning, I got to the shop early, like I always did. I liked those quiet minutes before the day started. The smell of sawdust lingering from yesterday's work. The sound of the old coffee pot clicking on. The sun sneaking through the dusty windows. It gave me a sense of peace, like the world was still choosing to be gentle. But when Mark walked in that day, he wasn't carrying his usual half-smile. He wasn't asking if we had a big day ahead or telling some quick story about a customer who called late last night. He walked in talking on the phone, loud, confident, almost polished. A tone I didn't recognize. He said, "Yeah, I can handle that. I'll come by the office after 9. No, just talk to me directly." He didn't introduce me. He didn't even nod my way. When he hung up, he just said, "Big opportunity," and walked past me like we were co-workers instead of brothers. It didn't sit right with me. But I didn't say anything. I told myself he was excited, that he wanted to impress whoever was on the other end. I wanted to believe the best, because that's what you do with the people you love. But the next few days followed the same pattern. He'd take calls outside. He'd step away in the middle of a conversation. He'd whisper names of clients I'd never heard, and when I asked about them, he'd say things like, "Oh, I'll fill you in later," or "It's nothing yet." But later never came. One afternoon, we were hired to redo a porch for a couple in a nearby neighborhood. It wasn't a big job, but it was the kind of work I loved, hands-on, detailed, honest. The kind of job where I could lose myself in the rhythm of the hammer, the scent of fresh wood, the satisfaction of straight lines and smooth finishes. A few hours in, the homeowners came out with lemonade. They walked straight to Mark. They thanked him, told him the porch was looking beautiful. They even complimented the design. The design was mine. He just nodded and said, "Yeah, we've been doing a lot of great work lately." We. Not he. Not I. Not my brother and I. Just a vague, comfortable we. And for the first time, something pinched inside my chest. It was small, but sharp enough to feel. I didn't speak up. I didn't correct them. I didn't want to embarrass him. I told myself again, he's excited. He's proud. Let him talk. But letting him talk meant letting myself disappear a little bit at a time. One morning, I showed up to the work site and found him already talking to the clients, without me. They were discussing options I hadn't heard about, changes I hadn't agreed to, prices I hadn't seen. I stood there quietly, right on the driveway, listening to a plan I didn't help build. I finally asked, "Why didn't you loop me in?" He said, "Relax, man. I got it." Just like that. Like I was overreacting. Like the business that came out of my savings, my experience, my sweat, was suddenly something he had. I tried to brush it off again. I kept trying. I wanted to be patient with him. I wanted to believe he was just overwhelmed, that the pressure of growing success was making him act differently. But deep down, something in me was beginning to shift. I started noticing things I had ignored before. The way he took credit in subtle ways. The way he talked to customers like he was the senior partner, even though I had decades of experience on him. The way his voice changed when he talked business. It became smoother, more polished, almost like he was rehearsing for a future where I wasn't standing next to him. I didn't want to believe that, but the feeling wouldn't go away. Then came the meeting, the one I wasn't invited to. It was a Thursday afternoon when I walked into the shop and found him wearing a clean shirt, fresh shave, hair combed back. That alone made me freeze. Our work wasn't the kind where you show up dressed like you're going to a banker's office. He said he had a meeting with some people. Wouldn't tell me who. Wouldn't tell me where. Said it wasn't important. I asked him, "You want me to come along?" He laughed. A quick, sharp laugh that cut me deeper than he realized. "No, man. They just want to talk to me. Just want to talk to me." That phrase sat in the air like smoke that wouldn't clear. He left. And I stood there in the shop, surrounded by tools I paid for, equipment I bought, shelves I built, listening to the echo of that door shutting behind him. For the first time, I felt uneasy. Like something was slipping away, and I didn't know how to grab it back. That evening, he came back smiling. He didn't tell me what the meeting was about. He didn't explain the new papers he put into a folder and slid into his backpack. He didn't tell me why he was humming that same tune he used to hum when he felt like he got away with something as a kid. I watched him closely, and I realized I didn't recognize the man standing in front of me anymore. A few days later, we finished a big flooring project. Difficult job. Long hours. Lots of precision. The customers were thrilled, told us they'd never seen such careful work. And again, they walked straight to him. Thanked him. Praised him. Called him talented. He stood there smiling, basking in every word. He didn't turn to me. Didn't say, "My brother here did most of the cutting." Didn't say, "He's the one who makes it look this clean." He didn't say anything. I expected to feel angry. But what I felt instead was small. Smaller than I had felt in years. Like I was standing in the wrong place in my own story. It kept going like that. Little by little. Day by day. The credit went to him. The attention went to him. The customers remembered him. He started introducing himself as the owner when we met new clients. Not once did he say co-owner or partner. Just owner. And I stood there with dirt on my hands, sweat on my forehead, nodding silently because I didn't know how to speak up without sounding petty. I still remember the moment the shift became undeniable. We had just finished a job, and a new client showed up on site. He shook Mark's hand and said, "I've heard you're the guy running things. They say you're the one to call." Mark didn't correct him. He didn't even glance at me. He smiled and said, "Yeah, that's me. That's me." 2 words. 2 simple words. And something in my chest went quiet. It's a strange thing, feeling like a stranger inside something you helped build with your own hands. It's like watching your own shadow walk past you. You want to reach for it, but all you touch is air. I went home that night and sat at my kitchen table long after the sun went down. No TV, no music, no sound except the old clock ticking on the wall. I sat there trying to figure out where I'd gone wrong, what I'd missed, what I should have seen sooner. But all I could think about was that little boy he used to be. The one who followed me around, the one who tugged on my shirt asking what I was building that day. And I wondered if that boy was ever really there, or if I had just imagined him because it made the world easier to carry. I didn't say anything the next day, or the next. I kept showing up to work, kept doing my part, kept hoping things would settle. But inside, something was unraveling. I started feeling like a guest. A helper. A background worker in a business that was supposed to be mine too. And even though I tried to ignore it, even though I tried to swallow it down, I knew deep in my bones that the shadows were getting longer. Something wasn't right. Something was shifting in a way I wouldn't be able to stop. I just didn't know then that this was only the beginning, and the real betrayal was still on its way. I remember the exact morning I found the flyers. It was one of those late spring days when the air feels like someone turned the thermostat up just enough to wake everything green. I had planned to stop by the print shop for business cards. Simple cards, nothing fancy, just something I could hand to a new customer. I liked having a card to give. It felt official, like the long hours and sore hands had a name you could hold. The printer handed me a small stack, all glossy and crisp, and I flipped through them on my way back to the truck. My heart did this small, foolish jump when I saw the logo, clean lines, a simple font, a picture of a hammer within a circle, and then the line beneath it. Founded by Mark Reynolds. I thought I misread it. I flipped another card. Founded by Mark Reynolds. I felt the color drain from my face, like someone had turned the lights down in the middle of a room. I stood there in the parking lot, the engine idling, and looked at those words until they blurred. Founded by Mark Reynolds. My brother's name, in the bold place my name had always been in my head. The name I'd imagined carving on a small plaque someday. Co-founder, partner, the man who stuck by me when there was nothing but doors closed and rent due. I felt a hollow click inside me, like a hinge rusted shut. When I got home, I set the cards on the kitchen table and waited for him to walk in. I wanted to ask him about it then, right away, but I also wanted to keep my voice steady. Maybe it was an oversight. Maybe the printer made a mistake. Maybe he'd laugh and tell me to calm down because branding was messy and sometimes one name made things simpler. I wanted so badly for it to be one of those things. He came in later than usual, hair slicked, phone in hand, and a smile like he'd just swallowed good news. I put the cards out in front of him. Why does it say you founded the company? I asked, trying to keep my voice even. He glanced at them, shrugged, and sat down. It's cleaner for branding, John. People remember one name. It's not a slight. It's our company, I said. We built it. We built it, he repeated. But his tone had that same flatness that meant the words were only half meant. But when you're selling to corporate clients, they like a story that's easy. They don't want partners. They want an owner. It looks more professional. But it's not the truth, I said. The words felt petty as soon as I heard them. Maybe it sounds small, but when your name is the one that keeps the lights on, when your hands built the benches and your money paid for the first batch of nails, a name matters. He pushed the cards back toward me. John, don't make this a hill to die on. We're getting bigger. Don't ruin what we've got by getting sentimental. I wanted to tell him that a name isn't sentiment. I wanted to tell him that when relatives and neighbors asked who started the business, when the church bulletin printed a congratulations, when the article in the local paper came out, it will say his name. Instead, I nodded, because arguing in the driveway never felt like the right place to lose a brother. The article in the paper hit the next week. I read it in a plastic chair at the community center after a morning job. There it was, 2 columns, a photo of Mark standing proud in front of a newly finished deck, and the headline, Local builder Mark Reynolds brings craftsman touch to modern home. The tone was warm. The photo was flattering. The captions called him an innovator. Folks I'd known since high school texted me congratulations. My sister-in-law called to say she'd seen it. I could feel the buzz of the town in my hands, and all of it pointed at him like a small, polite arrow I couldn't move. I went to the shop and found invoices neatly printed with his name at the top, contracts addressed to Mark Reynolds, owner, and brochures that matched the cards, perfect typography, the same logo. His email signature read, Mark Reynolds, founder and CEO. He had business cards made in a tone I never expected for my brother. Tailored, crisp, the kind of thing you handed to someone who sat on a board. When I asked about the contracts, he smiled and said, John, the bank likes it better this way. Easier for loans, easier for investors. He tapped the folder like a gavel. We needed to look more official. But then a cousin stopped by the shop, eyebrows raised, and clapped him on the back. Mark, look at you. I heard about the big contract downtown. Good for you, man. You've done well. I appreciate it, Mark said, leaning back, accepting the praise without a whisper of addition. I stood there with a rag in my hand and watched as people who had watched both of us grow. Neighbors who'd seen me fix Mark's bike when he was 9, the pastor who'd watched our family funerals and baptisms, started to tell a story that had room for only one hero. People began to call the business by his name. Mark's crew, they'd say. Mark's company. Someone posted on the town Facebook group. Proud of Mark Reynolds, local man making big moves. Comments flooded in. A few of them noticed the photos. The hands of different men in the shots, but the caption praised just one. When my aunt invited him to speak at the high school career day, I thought maybe she'd asked both of us. It turned out she only wanted him. The successful entrepreneur, she called him in a text to the family list. I felt that old, familiar sting then. The space at the table that had always read both of you now only read one name. I remember driving to a supply store once and hearing 2 men at the counter talking about the visionary behind the brand, and their voices carried that kind of admiration that wanted to be passed around. They were talking about Mark. I stood there and held my wallet and felt like an invisible man in my own story. There were other things too, small erasures that add up. He began scheduling client meetings without me. He started making executive decisions on vendors and pricing, and didn't loop me in. I'd find emails in the shared account with subject lines like owner's notes and founder's strategy, signed by him. It was as if the business had grown arms and decided to reposition itself with a new face, leaving the old one on the bench, wondering where the audience went. One afternoon a relative, our cousin Teresa, came by, beaming with pride. Mark, honey, you've done so well. I put your name on the Community Award nomination, she said, squeezing his shoulder like she had been a cheerleader. You deserve the recognition for all that hard work. I felt my throat tighten. We both did, I said, though I said it in a small voice. She looked at me, genuinely puzzled. Oh, well, John, you know how it is. Mark's taken it to another level. Another level. The phrase felt like a lamp switch flicked on in the dark. I had been standing in that lightless room for weeks, thinking all the while that I was half of the flame. The more I listened, the more I realized the narrative wasn't just shifting, it was being rewritten. I wasn't asked to contribute to the story anymore. People were writing it without me. I tried to speak up once, to go to him with a list of invoices and a stack of memories. The nights when we worked till 2 a.m, the first client who believed in us when no one else would, the way my savings had gone into that first van. I sat him down, and I said plainly, "When people think of this place, I want them to think of us both. It's not fair that your name is the only one there." He looked at me like I was a disappointed schoolteacher correcting a child. "You're making a mountain out of a molehill, John. Branding is practical. The world doesn't reward shared glory." "You're erasing me," I said. It rose out of me before I could stop it. He sighed. "I'm not erasing you," he said, and the sound of those words felt thin. "I'm building our future, and sometimes that means hard choices. Trust me. Trust me." I had trusted him with more than money. I had trusted him with the idea that family meant something that didn't evaporate when someone put on a clean shirt. Now relatives I loved nodded and called him the founder. Neighbors, customers, people I'd passed on the sidewalk for years, started to look at him like he had always been the craftsman in the family. At a Sunday barbecue, someone asked me with the best intentions, "So, Mark's the one who runs the business now?" The question perched like a bird, and I could have corrected them, told them the truth, the full story of sweat and shared nights. Instead I smiled and said, "Yeah, he's taken the lead." I felt like a man agreeing to edit his own history. There was a weight that settled in my chest after that, heavy, slow. It wasn't just about the cards or the contracts. It was the feeling that my name, the quiet one I used to call to wake my brother for school, the one our mother used when she wanted both of us in the kitchen, was being removed from the marquee. The town was learning a version of the truth where I only appeared in background images. I began keeping a small notebook then, writing dates, noting conversations, saving receipts. I wasn't sure who I was doing it for. Maybe for myself, so I could remember what had happened when the story no longer matched my memory. Maybe because somewhere I felt like a record might be the only thing that could anchor me. When I walked into the shop the morning, I found a stack of glossy flyers wedged in the mail slot, this time with a quote from a client praising Mark Reynolds, the visionary behind our renovation. I stopped, closed my eyes, and let the sounds of the shop fill me. The old radio played a soft country song. The smell of cut wood rose like smoke. I touched the pile of flyers like one touches a wound. He walked in then, whistling, and I held one up. He glanced, smiled, and said, "Looks good, doesn't it?" It did look good. Polished. Professional. Clean. And for a split second, a darker thought crossed my mind. What if I let him have the spotlight? What if I let the town tell a story where I was only the silent partner? What would that mean for the years we had poured into this place together? I didn't answer him. I put the flyers back in the slot and went to work because that's what I'd always done. I worked because the nails still needed pounding and a crooked board still needed straightening. But inside, a small, stubborn part of me was waking up. It didn't want to be erased. It didn't want to be the invisible hand everyone thanked without looking up. It wanted its name back. I didn't know yet how I would reclaim it. I only knew that the name disappearing was not something I could watch happen without trying to do anything at all. I still remember how ordinary the morning felt, the kind of gray October morning where the sky hangs low and everything sounds a little muffled. I went to the shop like any other day, boots thudding on the gravel, coffee in a thermos tucked under my arm. The dog at Mrs. Caldwell's porch barked as I passed. I liked that small rhythm. It made the world feel predictable, and predictability had been a comfort since we'd started this place with nothing but a beat-up truck and a toolbox. When I pushed the back door open, the fluorescent lights hummed overhead and the smell of sawdust was steady and familiar. But something on the table stopped me. There were papers spread out like a white flag, carefully arranged, typed formal. I set the thermos down and walked over without thinking, like a man walking toward a dish left on a stove. My heart did that odd little lurch again, the same one from the parking lot months earlier when I found his name on the cards. The top sheet had a header I knew too well, county clerk's stamp, lawyer's letterhead, and the title, Articles of Amendment. My fingers hovered over the paper. I could tell in a glance what it meant even before I read the dense paragraphs. It meant ownership changed. It meant signatures. It meant someone had decided there was a new truth to tell. I called out his name. He appeared from the office with his phone tucked to his ear, tie loose, hair still a little damp from his shower. He smiled the way he had learned to smile for clients. Easy, practiced, resourceful. He leaned against the doorframe, looking almost casual. "You see those?" I asked, not hiding the edge in my voice. He nodded like it was a thing to be expected. He set the phone down and came over, folding his hands as if we were about to run a meeting. "I signed some paperwork yesterday," he said. "We had to tidy up the structure. Investors prefer a single owner for clarity. It's better for the business." "Signed what?" I said. My voice felt small inside the big open room. I picked up a page and scanned. There it was in black and white legalese. Ownership transferred, managerial authority consolidated, the name of the company owner listed as Mark Reynolds, exclusively. My name was nowhere on the list. He gave a little shrug. "It's a practical move, John. You know that. You've been slowing down. The bank wants clean governance. They don't like split titles. Slowing down." The words landed like a blow I hadn't seen coming. I thought of the nights I'd climbed the ladder, the blisters I'd earned, the times I'd stayed late to make a deadline because he had to pick up kids or take an interview. Slowing down. It sounded polite, an explanation you'd hear in a retirement speech, not the justification for taking a man's history and filing it under someone else's name. "This wasn't a discussion," I said. "You didn't ask me to sign anything. You didn't talk to me about it." He looked at me, and for a moment something flickered, pity maybe or annoyance, I couldn't tell. "John," he said slowly, "you don't have the stamina like before. You missed meetings. You missed deadlines. It was time to professionalize. I did what needed to be done." I could feel the blood pounding in my temples. "We built this together," I said. "You know how much I put into it. My savings, my labor, my name belongs on this." He turned the page back over like a man examining a ledger. "You read the language wrong," he said. "You're still listed as a consultant. That's more practical. Less liability for you. Less headaches. Less liability. Less headaches." Each phrase pressed into me. It was almost as if he'd rehearsed the words to be reasonable, to be kind, to make the bulldozer of bureaucracy sound like mercy. I sat down on the workbench, hands folded, and tried to remember when the conversation had stopped being ours and started being a ledger entry. I thought of the first cold morning we painted that porch, and how our hands were raw afterward but proud. I thought of the first $100 we made, and how we celebrated it like it was a jackpot. I thought of the men who'd hired us because they trusted two brothers over a stranger. All those memories, they felt like stones in my chest now, heavy and immovable. "Why would you do that without me?" I asked finally. It wasn't all anger. There was a raw, simple hurt there, the kind that makes you feel younger and foolish for ever believing. He folded his arms. "Because someone had to grow the company. Someone had to be the face to outside folks. You weren't showing up the same way. You think I'm not showing up because I'm old?" The word old hit a raw place. I'd always thought age brought you more of a claim on history, not less. He sighed, that small, practiced sigh that meant he thought he was being reasonable. "John, look at it from the client's angle. They want an owner. They want accountability. You know how this world works. Trust me. I did this for the future. For the future." Again, those were words that promised something and then took another thing away. I could see the pattern now. First the branding, then the cards, now the legal bones. It wasn't an accident. It was a plan with a heart in it that beat to someone else's name. I wanted to rage. I wanted to throw the papers into the bin and shout until my voice broke. Instead, I folded the documents back and slid them into a neat pile. There was a kind of humiliation that comes with being betrayed by a brother. It's not just that you were deceived, but that your shared history was treated like a resource to be reallocated. It was cold and clinical, black and white, ink on paper, and there was nothing dramatic about it. It felt like watching a tree you once watered get cut into firewood. Neighbors started calling a few days later. "Congratulations on the big move," Mrs. Hanley said over the fence, genuine and warm. I saw the article about Mark expanding. Their voices were full of admiration, and I felt watched as if by a town whose camera had panned to a new subject. I found myself replaying conversations we'd had, interrogating every joke and every plan, trying to find the exact point where it shifted. One call with a supplier stood out. He had told them he was the point of contact now, that all new contracts go through him. Another time, a client had thanked him for being the visionary and only him. Each instance was a stitch, and the fabric of our partnership was unraveling. When I confronted him about the supplier, he shrugged. I signed the contracts to streamline operations. It's how business scales. Scale. The word had become his favorite. Scale this, streamline that. It was as if the language of growth had made empathy and shared credit seem like liabilities. His eyes shone with an ambition I used to admire. Now that shine felt like a blade. That night, I sat at the kitchen table with a flashlight and a notebook, the kind with the spiral on the side. I wrote dates and quotes and a small list of the projects we had done together. It felt petty in a way, but I'd learned the hard way that paper mattered. Paper could be used to erase you, but it could also be used to prove you existed. I wrote down the morning at the lumberyard, the time the generator blew, and we patched it with duct tape, the call from a client who'd trusted us when no one else would. Little things that mattered. Little things people forgot when a name was easier to sell. I thought about going to a lawyer then, formal steps, paperwork of my own. But there was also the memory of my mother's voice telling us that family is worth more than any piece of paper. I wanted to believe that. I wanted family to be a covenant that didn't get dissolved by a transfer of shares. But the papers on the table were not sentimental. They were practical and precise, and they had already begun to shape how the town and the bank and our clients saw us. So I decided to step back, not because I agreed with what he'd done, but because rage wouldn't help me think. I spent that week in the quiet corners of the shop, tightening bolts, rewriting estimates with my handwriting solid and visible. I answered calls with a calm voice and documented everything. I met an old friend at the diner and asked a few careful questions about corporate filings and partnership rights. I started to understand that the world he was moving into had rules and processes and a certain ruthlessness baked into its routines. Hurt and disbelief sat with me like two old dogs on the porch. They were heavy companions, but they taught me something in their quiet way. Whatever he had done was calculated, yes, but it was also a choice. And choices have consequences. That realization didn't make the betrayal less sharp. If anything, it made it clearer. This wasn't a misunderstanding you could fix with a handshake. This was a strategy. My brother had chosen a path that left me out. Now I had to choose mine. I spent the weekend thinking through small, practical things. How to make sure my hours were documented. How to protect the small accounts I managed, where my name still mattered in the community. I called a man at the bank and left a message. I sent a short email to a longtime client, polite and direct, to make sure lines of communication remained open. I started writing down the facts, dates, documents, who said what, who witnessed what. It was tedious and prosaic, but the facts were what would stand up when stories began to diverge. I also let myself sit in the hurt for a while, not to wallow but to name it. I felt invisible, replaced, boxed out of the thing I had helped build. That naming was important. It gave me a base to stand on. It let me see that anger without direction would only hollow me out. When the week closed, I locked the office and walked out into the late light. The shop looked the same as it ever had. Sawdust on the floor, ladders leaning like patient sentries, the bench full of tools that had seen us through thick and thin. But the inside story had changed. The papers on the table had altered the record. I rubbed the back of my neck and felt the weight of decisions to come. I didn't know yet how I would respond, legally, publicly, or quietly, but I knew a few things for certain. I would not be erased without a record, and I would not let bitterness ruin the life I had built. So I went home, made a cup of coffee, and opened the notebook again. I wrote down the date. I wrote the words of what had happened, as if telling the truth to paper could make it steadier. And then, with a breath that felt like the start of something, I began to plan. I didn't march back into that shop swinging my fists. I thought about it 100 times, how theatrical it would feel to storm in and throw down the papers and demand my name be put back where it belonged. But I also knew the kind of fight that wins isn't always the loud one. Sometimes it's the one you quietly prepare for, like stacking wood for a winter you can see coming. So I did the opposite of what my anger wanted. I slowed down, breathed, and started to be methodical. The first thing I did was call a lawyer. That felt odd, like admitting something I'd always thought unnecessary. That the world we lived in cared about signatures and ledgers more than the stories we told. I asked for a calm man who knew small businesses and family stories, not some courtroom showman who loved drama. When I sat across his desk, I tried not to let the trembling in my hands show. I laid it out, how we started, what I'd put in, the hours and the money, the fact that our arrangement had always been built on trust and on a dozen little acts that didn't always have receipts. The lawyer listened the way a trained listener does. Eyes steady, pen resting in his fingers. Then he surprised me by saying something I half expected and half feared. Verbal agreements are worth something if you can prove performance. The bank transfers you made, the invoices in your name, the emails showing who negotiated what, those are all footprints. They can add up to proof. It was blunt and legal and utterly practical. He told me to gather everything: texts, emails, bank statements, old contracts, even the notes on the backs of envelopes. He said, get witnesses. Names who can say, I was there. I saw him do this. The language was dry, but it felt like a map. So I started collecting footprints. It became a slow, quiet obsession. I dug through old folders in the back room where we kept a chaotic pile of receipts, pulled out envelopes, and found stamps and memos I'd almost forgotten. I printed emails that showed my name attached to vendor negotiations. I found transfers from my savings account, small at first, then larger, each labeled with project names. I pulled the old planner from the drawer and copied pages where I had scribbled estimates and dates. I called the lumberyard owner who'd known us from the start and asked if he'd be willing to jot a note about credit we'd gotten early on. He agreed without hesitation. A retired electrician I'd helped years ago said he remembered the nights we stayed until midnight to fix a broken heater for a client. I wrote down his words and thanked him. The more I gathered, the more certain I felt that our story had physical proof, paper and pixels that matched the memory in my head. I also stopped showing up at the shop. That felt strange and heavy. For 40 years, my mornings began there. It was the place that set the rhythm of my days. But the lawyer advised a measure of distance, and there was a strategy in it that made sense. If I kept being present without protest, the community would assume things were fine. Absence would force questions. So I took long walks, sat in the diner for coffee, and let the house be quiet in ways it hadn't been since my wife was alive. Each time I passed the shop and saw his truck out front, my chest tightened. But I held to the plan. I focused on building the file like a craftsman building a frame, solid, level, and honest. Word got around that I was consulting an attorney. People called me with different tones, some sympathetic, some surprised, some cautious. A few regular clients stopped by just to say hello and left with a folded note or a story to tell. That small-town network I'd thought was fraying held steady in places I hadn't realized. It surprised me and steadied me. I had always believed reputation counted for something, and in this moment, those small, human endorsements felt more valuable than any headline. When I finally asked the lawyer to write a letter, I felt a strange calm. The letter wasn't angry. It was factual, short, and to the point. It requested clarification of ownership, documentation of transfers, and a meeting to discuss the matters. It used words like notice and request and good faith. My brother read it and folded it like a waiter folding a napkin, as if it were something he didn't need to worry about. That was his first clear reveal. He expected me to fold, to be placated by a line of words. He didn't expect persistence. He called me the evening after the letter arrived. His voice had the same smoothness he used in client meetings, but there was thrum of something else under it. Nervousness or annoyance, I couldn't tell. "John," he began, "we can talk this through. There's nothing to get upset about." "I don't want to talk for show," I said. "I want the records. Let's sit down where there's a notary or a lawyer." He tried to insist on a private family conversation. Avoid the paper, avoid the witnesses. I said no. That was the first time I felt something inside me shift. An old reflex to preserve the peace loosened, and in its place, a steady claim formed. I wasn't doing it to punish him. I was doing it because the erasure hurt, and because history deserves accuracy. At the meeting with the lawyer and his attorney, I sat across from him and watched him hold his posture while his lawyer tried the same gentle lines he'd used on me. This was for the future. This was for the bank. You're being sentimental. My lawyer presented the file I'd built: bank transfers, invoices, witness statements, emails where he'd responded to clients asking about unfamiliar terms and I'd answered with clarifications, drafts of proposals with my handwriting in the margins. My hands didn't shake when I pushed the documents across the table. I had a strange quiet pride in how concrete those things were. They were the proof that the work I'd done wasn't just memory, it had weight. When asked to explain the legal filings, my brother's voice wobbled. Not much, but enough. He said he'd been advised, that it was efficiency. He said he'd thought he was doing the right thing. He tried to say it like it was a small administrative misstep that could be easily fixed, but the facts on the table didn't bend to his softness. There were bank statements with my name, invoices in my handwriting, witnesses who remembered me negotiating deliveries and calming angry customers. The lawyer nodded and asked for time to sort through everything. I sat there and felt like a man carrying a lantern while fog drifted around the town. The light didn't feel bright, but it was steady. After the meeting, the town started to look at us differently. Some faces were sympathetic, some were shocked. There were awkward silences at the hardware store. His friends began to call less. It was a small thing, but it mattered. When people who had once greeted us both with equal warmth now hesitated, I realized how tangled a reputation can be once new stories start to circulate. But the facts I'd assembled were beginning to push back against the new story his branding had told. The confrontation that finally happened wasn't the chaotic shouting match I'd imagined in my sleep. Instead, it was a humble, terrible thing. He came by the diner one rain-blurred afternoon. We both ordered coffee that we didn't really taste. He looked older than the man I'd known. His bravado had shrunk a little, like a shirt too big washed and left to dry. He spoke first, with a voice that tried to be conciliatory. I didn't mean to, he started. You meant to, I said. It wasn't loud. I didn't want to make a scene. But the truth seemed better said plainly. I know this was a choice. He trembled then, and for a moment, I saw the boy who'd asked for my help years ago, wide-eyed and terrified. I thought I was doing what was best, he said. I thought I could carry it and protect it. I didn't know how to keep you in the picture. Those words were not an apology. They were a kind of explanation that still tried to shift the burden. But something else happened then. He called me by the name only he used when we were younger, a nickname that was softer than the business titles. And I felt the ache of betrayal and the strange tenderness of shared history collide. I thought of all the projects we'd done in the rain, the meals we'd shared on the tailgate, the nights we'd laughed until our sides hurt. Those memories were real, stitched into me. But so was the cold print of his new ownership. I told him I wasn't looking for theater. I told him I wanted acknowledgement. I wanted recognition, not revenge. He started to reach across the table like a man trying to fix a broken clock, gentle, clumsy. But this clock wasn't something a single hand could mend. We talked then about the shop, the clients, the nights. At one point his voice broke and he said, I'm sorry, plain and small. It wasn't the legal remedy, but it was something. It landed in me like rain on bare soil, necessary and not sufficient. The quiet part of the fight kept unfolding after that. There were negotiations, small settlements, agreements about credit on the website and the brochures, adjustments to the paperwork that restored certain acknowledgments and ensured I had rights and a voice. It wasn't complete vindication. Some things couldn't be fixed with amended forms. But it was enough to make the record truer. And that mattered. When your life's work is a thing you can point to, there's a dignity in having your name back where folks can see it. Through it all, what surprised me was how my own sense of strength grew not from the winning, but from the standing up. It was the act of deciding to keep my history intact that shifted something inside me. I didn't need him to crumble to feel whole. I simply needed to no longer let the story of my life be rewritten without my say. In the quiet after, while legal dust settled and the shop hummed its usual small noises, I kept returning to the simple things that had always steadied me. The smell of sawdust, the feel of a good tool, the unhurried cup of coffee in the morning. Those were the things that had anchored me before anyone's ambition got in the way. The fight had been painful and exhausting, but it taught me that protection can be gentle and firm at once. When the confrontation was over, I felt bruised, yes, but also strangely clear, like a man who'd trimmed away dead branches and found the tree still standing. What came next wasn't a sweep of triumph or a closing curtain. It was quieter, daily work, small repairs to trust, and the slow rebuilding of a place inside myself where I no longer waited for permission to be recognized. The town started to look at the shop and its two names differently again, and the ledger of my life slowly matched the ledger of the company. That alignment gave me something I hadn't expected. Not revenge, but a kind of peace. I didn't wake up the morning after that confrontation feeling victorious. Truth is, I woke up tired. Not the kind of tired a good nap fixes. This was years deep, bone-heavy. Betrayal has a way of wearing you down in places you didn't even know could get tired. But it also clears the air. And as I sat at my kitchen table with my first cup of coffee, listening to the quiet of a house that held every chapter of my life, I felt something peaceful settle in. It wasn't joy. It wasn't sadness. It was clarity. That week, everything we'd been building toward, on paper and in conversation, finally came together. The lawyers did their part, sorting through piles of proof, tracing the steps of the partnership from the beginning, and building a picture that was honest. The truth held its ground in a way my brother never expected. Every receipt, every invoice, every late-night message about deliveries or deadlines, they stacked up like bricks around the foundation of the business we built together. I hadn't realized until then how much of my life I'd poured into that place. And maybe he hadn't realized it either. Or maybe he had, which made what he'd done even harder to swallow. When the legal decision finally came down, it didn't arrive with fireworks or shouting. It came with a few pages of typed words and signatures. It said, plainly and without emotion, that I was entitled to half of the company's value. Half of the thing I helped build with my own hands. It stated that my contributions were documented, verified, and significant. The truth, written in black and white. My brother didn't come see me that day, and I didn't expect him to. I heard from others that he stayed late at the shop, sitting in the back room with the lights dimmed. A part of me felt sorry for him. Betrayal doesn't happen without consequence, not just legally but emotionally. A man who chooses ambition over loyalty always pays some sort of price. But I didn't take pleasure in that. I didn't walk around feeling like I'd won. What I felt was something cleaner, calmer. Like a knot in my chest had finally loosened enough for me to breathe properly. The settlement arrived a few weeks later. Enough money for me to retire. Enough to prove that my work had mattered. Enough to give my life a different ending than the one he tried to write for me. I didn't run out to celebrate. I didn't go buy anything big or flashy. Instead, I went out behind my house, to the little shed that had been sitting there unused for far too long. Dust covered the old bench. Piles of wood leaned in corners. Tools I hadn't touched in years hung on the wall like old friends waiting patiently. I rolled up my sleeves, opened the windows, and started cleaning. There was something healing about sweeping that floor, clearing away the sawdust of years, wiping down the bench, sorting the nails and screws. The motions reminded me of who I was long before the business ever existed. I was a man who loved working with his hands. A man who found peace in shaping something from nothing. A man who didn't need applause or headlines or his name on a sign to feel whole. It struck me then just how much of myself I had given away without noticing. I had always believed that family comes first, that sacrifice is part of love. And I still believe that. But there's a difference between giving from the heart and being erased. When someone tries to take credit for your life's work, your sweat, your hours, your dreams, it takes something from your spirit. Reclaiming that shed behind my house felt like reclaiming my spirit too. Little by little, the workshop became my sanctuary. I started building small things, birdhouses, picture frames, a rocking chair I'd been meaning to finish for years. I woke up each morning with purpose, but the kind that didn't require anyone's approval. I played old music while I worked. Sometimes I made a pot of soup and carried it out there with me for lunch. The days felt slower but richer. One afternoon, maybe a month after everything was finalized, my brother showed up. I heard his truck before I saw him. He didn't walk with the same confident swagger he used to have. He stood at the edge of my yard, hands in his pockets, waiting like a boy rehearsing an apology. I didn't make him wait long. I wiped my hands on a cloth and walked over. He looked at me with eyes that were tired and ashamed. He said my name in a voice softer than I'd heard in years. He said he was sorry, this time without excuses, without lies, without trying to make himself look noble. Just sorry. Simple and honest. And I believed him. But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It doesn't mean stepping back into a place where you can be hurt the same way again. Forgiveness just means you stop carrying the weight of someone else's choices. I told him I didn't hate him, and that was the truth. I told him I wished him well, because I did. But I also told him the boundaries were going to stay. No shared accounts. No shared business. No shared decisions. If we were going to rebuild anything between us, it had to be as brothers, not as business partners. He nodded, and for the first time in a long while, I felt like he understood what his actions had cost. After he left, I stood in my yard for a long time. The sun was dipping low, painting the sky gold. I looked at the workshop, my workshop, and I understood something I'd missed all those years. My revenge wasn't the payout. It wasn't making the truth public. It wasn't even proving that I had been right. My revenge was simply living a life he couldn't take credit for. A life that was mine again. A life built from the quiet things: sunlight, sawdust, slow mornings, honest work, and the peaceful sound of a tool resting exactly where you put it. Every now and then I still hear people talking about the business. Some say it's thriving. Some say it isn't the same anymore. That's not my concern. My life happens behind that little workshop now. Sometimes neighbors stop by just to sit and talk. Sometimes I work on a project for someone who can't pay more than a handshake. Sometimes I just sit, listening to the birds and thinking about how strange and beautiful it feels to have a second chance at defining your own ending. Betrayal taught me a lot, but the biggest lesson was this. When you finally choose yourself, the world feels different. Quieter, gentler, more honest. And that's how my story settles. Not with bitterness, not with triumph, but with truth. The truth of who I am, the truth of what I built, and the truth that no one, not even someone you love, has the right to erase your life's work. Thank you for staying with me through this story. If this story resonated with you, leave a like and consider subscribing. You can also drop any comment below, even just one word. Maybe tell me where you're watching from or what time it is right now. Sometimes one word is enough to say you were here.